$222,000 in just 13 minutes. That's how much Tim lost to an international scammer. His bank claims there is nothing it could do. Tim says more must be done.
Tim Watkins is not the profile of a typical scam victim, if such a profile even exists. He runs a marketing business. His profession depends on understanding persuasion, recognizing manipulation, and reading intent behind messaging. He describes himself as savvy, and by most measures he is. But sophistication in one domain does not confer immunity in another. The scam that targeted Tim did not rely on obvious deception. It relied on perfect imitation. The text message he received did not arrive from an unfamiliar number. It appeared within an existing thread of legitimate messages from his bank, NAB. Hundreds of prior texts, dating back years, all authentic. And then, seamlessly inserted among them, the one that was not. This is the nature of spoofing. The technology allows a sender to disguise their true number and adopt the identity of a trusted institution. The recipient has no way to distinguish the fraudulent message from the genuine ones that preceded it. The visual continuity creates a form of inherited trust. Each legitimate message in that thread had trained Tim to respond without suspicion. The scammers did not need to build credibility. They borrowed it from years of authentic communication. The timing was deliberate. Tim had just received payment from his clients. His accounts held the accumulated earnings of his work. This was not coincidence. Scammers often monitor patterns, waiting for moments of maximum vulnerability. Payday is not merely a financial event, it is a psychological one. The presence of funds creates a heightened sensitivity to unauthorized charges. A text suggesting a suspicious Amazon purchase triggers immediate protective instinct. The urge to act, to prevent loss, overrides the instinct to pause. The voice on the phone was professional. It followed the script of legitimate customer service. The scammer did not sound nervous or rushed. They sounded like someone doing their job. This procedural consistency is essential. It creates what might be called impersonation consistency, where every element of the interaction matches the victim's expectations based on prior experience. The rhythm of the call, the language used, the requests made, all aligned with how a real bank representative might conduct a fraud verification. Tim handed over one-time passcodes. These codes are designed as a security measure, a second layer of authentication meant to prevent unauthorized access. But their effectiveness depends on the assumption that only the legitimate account holder will possess them. When a scammer convinces a victim to read those codes aloud, the security mechanism becomes the instrument of theft. The system worked exactly as designed. It simply could not distinguish between coercion and consent.
Sophisticated and relentless.
I was very embarrassed and reticent, apart from with close family and friends, to mention it.
Think you can pick a scam message? Think again.
The feeling at the pit of my stomach.
Tim Watkins thinks he's pretty savvy. He owns a marketing business and isn't easily fooled.
So the text basically said, here is the passcode that you will require for the online payment that you have made for $850 on Amazon. If it wasn't you, or you didn't request this, please call this number.
While Tim was in the supermarket, a text message popped up from the same number his bank uses, and Tim says it looked like the real deal.
Now, as you will see if I scroll back, this is on a thread of hundreds of other texts which are legitimate from NAB that I have had since, 23rd of January 2022.
Tim says he'd just been paid by his clients. Payday for the scammers.
The person on the end of the phone sounded very professional, in exactly the same way as NAB would do so.
Tim was tricked into handing over one-time passcodes generated in his NAB app.
I thought, something's not right here. I saw that there had been 10 transactions totaling just over $222,000. So it cleaned out my accounts.
It's called spoofing. Scammers use technology to fake their number so it appears they're calling or messaging from a real bank. Listen to one in action.
If you do want to check the authenticity of this call, you can check the number that I'm calling you from today. It's on the back of your card.
Because Tim gave the scammer one-time passcodes, Tim's bank NAB told him it isn't liable for the funds.
How on earth could they allow 10 payments going to 2 different banks and completely new payees for $222,000 in 13 minutes? How can they let that happen?
Look, we've stopped hundreds of scams in the last 12 months, and we stop hundreds of scams every year. Unfortunately, though, the environment is so hostile that scams will still get through.
Chris Sheehan from NAB's investigations and fraud team.
The first thing I would say about refunding customers is that the customers aren't to blame here. The bank isn't to blame. That the only people who are truly to blame for these events are the transnational organised crime groups, and if we could hold them to account and force them to repay customers for the loss, that's what should occur.
NAB says it can't speak about specific customers' cases.
We're doing everything we can to try and protect them as best as we possibly can.
So they basically washed their hands. At the end of the actual investigation, they offered me $10,000 in full and final resolution that if I didn't escalate the dispute with AFCA, they would give it to me. However, if I did escalate it, they would take it away.
AFCA is the financial ombudsman which Tim's complained to. He also wants laws changed.
So if you had a spoof like mine, however you were hoodwinked because it's very sophisticated, it is not your fault. The banks will actually refund all the money.
As we've seen in the United Kingdom, where they have a contingent reimbursement model and there's significant liability placed on banks to refund customers from scams, it's not slowing down the rate of fraud or scams that are targeting UK citizens and UK businesses.
According to Scamwatch, almost 15,000 Australians fell victim to bank impersonation scams last year, robbing them of more than $20 million.
They are really growing in sophistication, and that is leading to cases where we see people's entire bank accounts being cleaned out.
Katrina Lowe is the Deputy Chair at the ACCC, which runs Scamwatch.
ASIC has recently released a report that suggests that approximately 4% of consumers who suffer losses receive compensation for those losses, and that roughly 13% of scams are disrupted at that point of money leaving bank accounts. We want to see greater investment across all institutions that have a role to play in stopping scams.
In a bid to combat bank impersonation scams, the federal government's creating what it calls an SMS sender ID registry. It could work like this. Companies like banks or telcos register their unique sender ID. Incoming messages from scammers trying to mimic that ID are blocked.
The Sender ID registry is an example of a reform that's been successful in other jurisdictions. So we've seen both Singapore and the United Kingdom introduce reforms of those kinds, and we are optimistic that that will make a real difference.
10 transactions, 2 receiving banks, completely new payees, $222,000, 13 minutes. These numbers deserve isolation because they reveal the architecture of institutional failure. Tim's account had no history of transfers to these recipients. The amounts were large, the velocity was extreme, and yet every transaction was processed without interruption. Banks maintain sophisticated fraud detection systems, algorithms designed to flag anomalies, patterns that deviate from established behavior. A customer who has never sent money to a foreign account suddenly initiating multiple large transfers should, in theory, trigger intervention. A phone call, a temporary hold, a simple question, but none of that occurred. NAB's response introduces a framework that has become standard across the financial industry. The customer is not blamed. The bank is not blamed. Responsibility is assigned to transnational organized crime groups, entities that exist beyond jurisdiction, beyond accountability, and beyond the reach of any individual victim. This framing is accurate in its identification of the perpetrators, but it is incomplete in its distribution of obligation. The conditional settlement offer reveals a troubling dynamic: $10,000, but only if Tim agrees not to escalate. The money becomes leverage, a mechanism to prevent further scrutiny rather than an acknowledgement of institutional responsibility. If he pursues his complaint through the financial ombudsman, the offer disappears. This is not compensation. It is negotiation. Tim has asked a question that regulators across the world are now confronting. If the spoofing technology is sophisticated enough to bypass a customer's judgment, if the message appears in the same thread as legitimate communications, if the voice on the phone is indistinguishable from a real employee, at what point does the burden shift from the individual to the institution? The United Kingdom has implemented what is called a contingent reimbursement model, placing significant liability on banks to refund customers who fall victim to authorized push payment fraud. NAB's representative noted that this model has not slowed the rate of scams targeting UK citizens. This is true, but the purpose of such regulation is not solely prevention. It is also alignment of incentive. When banks bear financial consequences for fraud, the investment in detection and intervention becomes a matter of institutional self-interest rather than customer service.
While Tim's managed to recover $29,000, he's got this warning for others. How are you or other people supposed to know what's true, what's not?
You're not. You don't know. You have to now sadly assume everything is bogus.
Yeah, it really is too little too late, and let's hope those reforms can be fast-tracked. Until then, perhaps Tim's advice is best: assume everything is a scam.